It's just a cartoon type thing.
Oh, okay. So we're going here.
Okay, so I'd like to call the meeting of the February Planning and Zoning Planning Commission meeting. We are going to rearrange the agenda just slightly, and item 6 is going to move up to item 1, and then everything will drop down. So that's election of officers. I guess they want to elect officers quick before we...
Or if you guys want to approve the agenda as amended with 6 moving up to number 1, you could do a motion for that.
Yeah, let's do that. Chair would like entertain a motion to approve the agenda with the change of moving the election of officers or officials up to number 1.
So moved.
So move. We have a second.
Second.
Okay. Before we do that, though, I'd like to welcome Terry and Matt to the Planning Commission. Welcome aboard. Good to see you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoy this most of the time.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, we have election of officers. We have a chair.
I don't think we voted on the motion to approve the
We
agenda.
didn't vote on that, thank you. Okay, we got a motion and a second, and Chair would, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries, okay. So then we have the election of officials, and the first official is the chair, where I have sat for many, many years. Would anybody like to be chair?
Motion, Dick.
Second, Dick.
Can we have some discussion? Okay, I guess as long as there isn't a long line of people waiting to be chair. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Vice chair, I believe right now that's Rick Ryerson, or is it Mike Parker?
No.
No.
I was chair.
No,
Rick.
Yeah, Rick is.
it's Rick.
Yeah.
Well, in Rick's absence, anybody want to be vice chair?
Actually, it's me.
It's you.
You elected me last year. Remember, you railroaded me in.
Oh, okay. So then the vice chair is Mr. Navarro. Sir,
That's where I am right now, yes.
okay?
I'd love to make a motion, since he did such a good job last year, to nominate Mr. Stephen Narbrud.
Oh, go on.
Second.
Okay, and it's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And secretary, I believe that's Mark Borsett.
So moved.
Yes.
Second? Do we have a second?
Yes.
Okay, motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All right. I guess we've got our officials set for another year. Thank you all. I guess, thank you personally for your confidence in my ability to remember to be here on time. Right day, right place.
Had to beat you to the punch today on the text.
Yes, you did. I wasn't gonna do it until after Rotary, and then I got tied up for a minute, and bam, you had it.
All right.
Can I just mention one thing?
Yes.
We're absent a couple of members, and we were talking a little bit, and I was just saying how nice it is, and I think important it is. We kind of have a cross-section of a lot of different personalities and so on and so forth. And now with Dick being the chair, year after year after year, I mean, I really appreciate it, and I know we all do. A lot of experience, keep everybody together, and I remember when we did this or that. So there's some continuity factors, I think, that have really helped. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
You bet.
Okay, we have the minutes of the January 10th, 2023 meeting. Everybody get a chance to read them? They look to be pretty well-written and organized. If no one has any comments, entertain a motion to approve.
Motion to approve, Ron.
Okay, do we have a second? Come on, one of you new guys.
Sure.
Boy, wait a minute. I take that back. You can't make a motion or a second because you weren't at the meeting.
Oh, fair enough.
So that's a point of order, just for future. is that If you weren't at the meeting, you can't approve the minutes for the meeting that you weren't at.
That's fair.
So, we
Second.
have Steve.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? No discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
You can vote in favor of them, but you just can't have be the mover.
All right.
Okay. Okay, now we are to council action, the H&H properties.
This is, you wanna talk about that one? Sure. So the H&H Properties was the former Valley Dairy on 111 4th Street East. And we had an application from the new owner of that building to a conditional use permit. So just to bring you guys up to speed, Matt, Terry, the the proposed use for that building on the first floor is going to be retail space. And the way our zoning code is written, that one happens to be in a downtown fringe district instead of a downtown zoning district. So in a downtown fringe district, if the area of the building exceeds 3,000 square feet, then it would require a conditional use permit. If it was in a downtown zoning district, then it wouldn't matter, but because it's in the fringe, then it requires a conditional use permit, which would allow between 3,000 and 5,000 square feet, because the fringe kind of starts to blend into the residential neighborhoods. So that's why it's different than the downtown. So that one, we did a conditional use permit, requires a public hearing, and it also it's published in the paper 10 days before the meeting, the hearing, and also notification to everyone within a 350-foot radius, and because it's site-specific. And so the Planning Commission held the hearing at the last meeting and recommended to the City Council that that be approved, and that one was approved. So every month on agendas, we include the council actions since the previous Planning Commission meeting, so it kind of closes the loop for everybody here, so you know what the end result was, because the final decisions are up to the City Council. So.
Okay.
And Leanne, Matt Schaefer,
Hi, Matt.
Terry Averill,
Hi, Terry.
new members, Leanne Nelson. She's been a longstanding member. Okay, next item on the agenda will be a hearing on the buffer ordinance amendment. We have the documents with the new.
Yes, so this is the public hearing for an ordinance amendment on performance standards, commercial and industrial zoning districts to amend buffer requirements. Buffer strips have been so the buffer strips are required if you're developing or improving commercial or industrial zoning district land, if it borders either residential, and there's 4 residential districts, R1, which would be your suburban residential, like the Edgewood Drive area, for example, R2, general residential district, which would be kind of your Horace Avenue North or Maple Avenue South. Those areas are the R2, slightly smaller lot requirements, a little more dense. And then R3 is manufactured home parks, and R4 is the multifamily. So any commercial or industrial that borders one of those requires, or ag land. And the reason that we require them adjacent to ag land is typically ag until it's zoned something else. So there's a possibility it could become residential, so we enforce it as such.
Likely gonna change.
Huh?
It's probably likely gonna change.
Correct, yep. So the buffer strip has been a 35-foot 35 feet, and it would be just on the boundary bordering residential properties. So if you have a business and then somebody has a home next to it, then it's 35 feet so that they can't do anything on. It's got to be retained as green space. It also requires a site obscuring fence or vegetation that's site obscuring so that it doesn't, adversely impact the home. So if you thought if you had a body shop next to your house, that's what it's for. And we've had some issues with those in the past because they're, we require the 35-foot buffer strip. Usually we'll get the site plan for a business with the 35-foot buffer strip on it, and we tell them that they have to have the site obscuring fence or the vegetation, but it just, in so many cases, it doesn't happen. At the end of the project's done, they don't do it. The only means that the city has to enforce that, we can hold their certificate of occupancy from their building permit, but some banks want to see that, some banks don't, so it doesn't carry as much weight as it probably should. Then our next recourse is to get Delray involved and tackle it legally to force the person to do what they agreed to when they signed the permit. So this ordinance amendment, basically what it would do is amend the requirements, and in your attachment, the third sheet, and with the ordinance amendment in red has the amended language. So essentially what we're doing is saying that we're adding a requirement, or this action would add a requirement for a conditional use permit, much like the one we just talked about for the 111 4th Street. So somebody wants to build a business, and they're, I'll talk about an active one going on right now, just for a case study. UPS is adding onto their facility. They need to have a buffer strip on the south side of their property because they're bordering an apartment building, which is residential, and there's decks and kids and all that stuff, playground equipment. So what we're proposing is to add, and this was developed through a few different planning commission meetings, is to create a conditional use permit requirement. So that owner would apply for, if this was in effect now, would apply for a conditional use permit. Conditional use permit would have their buffer strip plan. It would show what they're planning for vegetation, what they're planning for a fence, and then we would hold a public hearing. We'd publish it in the paper, the hearing notice, and we would also send notice out to everyone within a 350-foot radius so they're made aware of what's going on and they have an opportunity to come into a hearing and comment on it. Then the planning commission would review it, and then they would recommend that for approval to the city council. City council would approve it, and then upon that approval, then we would authorize the building official to issue the building permit. And so really what's all we're trying to do, I think, with this action is add, make this a lot more intentional than it had been in the past. So it's part of the plan, And so we also clarified one thing, that it would not be required adjacent to streets or alleys unless required by that conditional use permit. There's some cases, so if a business, for example, we talked about this, an example, Arby's. All right, Arby's is a business, it's a business zoning district, and then across the street there's some residential properties. Would it be appropriate to require a 35-foot buffer strip alongside that street, and with a fence and with vegetation? And the consensus was that that the street is probably the adequate barrier in itself, unless there's some special circumstance that the planning commission would recommend that. And then I believe we took away the 35-foot width, and then we added language to say, or is determined by conditional use permit. So let's say that's a scenario of a new business downtown where they got the lot is 140 feet deep, and say it's 50 feet wide, and say there's a residential across the alley from them. Should they have to tie up 35 feet of that 140 feet with a buffer strip? That's not, that's taking a pretty large percentage of that lot and maybe making it where it's not doable. So the planning commission felt it would be appropriate to reserve that right, so somebody comes and says, hey, I can't, I don't want to give up 35 feet, but I can put a fence here, or maybe the way the building is, if there's no access, maybe the planning commission says there's really no need for one there, so that would all be part of the conditional use permit. So, and I guess, there's been, what kind of brought this to light, there's been a couple of cases lately. There was a American hotel that did not create their fence or when it was built, and then that came first. They weren't required to do it. It was called out on their site plan, but they didn't put anything up. And then the property next to them got cleared and developed, and then people built homes there. And now the people with the homes there were complaining that they didn't have any screening for that. So that ended up being Delray being very involved in that one to order based on the planning commission and council's approval, fence be installed there, and that finally happened, but it took quite a while. It was pretty painful. It would have been so much simpler to have had a little more planning together with them up front. And then there's also another one that's an active case still with the Northwest Mini Storage. They have a lot of things that are on a buffer strip, and they also have, they're sitting on top of public utilities right now. There's storage units portable storage units on top of the city's water main, sanitary sewer and power lines. It's not a good situation, but that's an active one that Delray is working on with the owner.
Yeah, and then we kind of unilaterally or, just decided that we'd wait till the election was over because we didn't want to make it look like targeting somebody that was, running for election.
Yeah.
So I think we'll try to deal with that again come the spring. And then in regard to the American one, kind of the reason that we're trying to go to the conditional use is it kind of gives the planning commission a little bit more control over what, the fence is going to be, where it's going to be, that type of thing. So when they had it, was it Senex that's over here?
Mm-hmm.
So they had their fence up, and then the American put their fence up, but there was nothing prescribed as to where it had to be, so it didn't mesh up with the Senex one. So now there's still like a gap that people can see through, but the American is complying because they have a fence on their property line area. But those are some things that we could have taken a look at if it was part of a conditional use permit and said, okay, we want you to do this, but we want you to kind of have it, online with the other one.
So it's really just adding some intentionality to the process.
I think basically better communication up front, so everybody knows what's going on now and in the future. And if the property gets sold, that buffer still goes with the property, and so it just works out better, I guess, if we solve the problems ahead of time instead of after the fact.
Yeah, and how long has the 35-foot requirement been a rule or a part of city code?
I've been around forever, and it's been, I think it was there when I started.
So it's been for so
Yeah.
there's basically no business out there that's
About when the earth
grandfathered
cooled.
in before it even probably, huh?
Probably some, but I mean, the
Not very
60s, probably when the ordinance was probably created in the 60s.
I guess so.
So prior to that, for
Yeah.
sure, yeah.
Okay, that's interesting.
So
But
it
that's
gets,
a
sorry?
I was gonna say, that's a good question, because there are some that are grandfathered in, and then they don't, well, that one doesn't have it, and why don't I? So we're trying to eliminate that now by planning ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it gets it in upfront on the plans in the beginning. Everybody understands what's going to happen, but what prevents the business from letting it go by the wayside as they've done in the past?
Well, we can bring an action for zoning violations and enforcement through the court. Essentially get a court order, that they have to do it, or they're not in compliance with zoning. So there could be an argument that we could close the business down, as it were, which would be pretty extreme, but.
Right, just curious to see how that works.
Well, I think you bring up a good question. So there again, it's Tom Grealis, bowling alley, for a long time he didn't have trees there, and then he put up trees, but then trees die, and so how do you keep them in compliance? So at least if in the future this is what you wanted trees instead of fence, da-da-da-da. And we expect that that needs to be done in the future, just like any other compliance.
And I think it was maybe Emery that had pointed out that Canaan had his storage units, you know, kind of in the buffer zone area. But then it also brought up the point that, you know, there really is no fence or obstructions or anything there, and there's nothing behind Northern Motors, and nobody's made any complaint, and there's lots of lawn area going up to that apartment. So at what point do we kind of just go around the whole town and try to see,
Yeah.
you know,
And the-
who's complying, who's not?
And there, when you mention water and sewer, et cetera, there's deep water and sewer there. So if and when, well, I should just say when, because some point in time, somebody will have to get out there and start digging. You need to have that room to put dirt and so on and so forth. And if somebody has put things on an easement or a buffer, and then later on you need to do that, then the city has to come in with the bulldozers and change it, and then you get hard feelings, and so just kind of trying to communicate ahead of time.
So what you're saying, like in this other instance that we we're just talking about, that's not only a buffer zone, but also an easement? So you've got kind of two things going on there?
Yeah, probably 35 of it is buffer, and then about the south 10 or 15 of it is utility easement.
Can you be a utility easement
Yeah.
and a buffer zone both?
Yep. Yep.
Right, so I mean, that's the kind of thing, and that's why, at the end of the day, we wanted to have this be a conditional use for any of these, so that we could have, you know, kind of a final look at it, and we could say, hey, we don't want you to put your fence on top of the utility easement, for example, because if the city comes, you spend $5,000 on a fence these days, you know, for an 8-foot high site obscuring plastic fence over a couple hundred feet, and all of a sudden you gotta go in there and redo the sewer line. Well, then the city doesn't wanna have that overhang on them, because there's that fence that they have to take down, you know, and depending on, it's 20 below zero and they're out there digging and, you know, trying to fix this thing, you've gotta make sure that it's open, you know. That's something else we're gonna be talking about here in the future, is some of these utility easements and people building sheds on them and things like that.
We actually have that list on the next item here.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
So basically, like on the back of a business, with that, in that 35 feet, so even if there's a fence, you still cannot do anything with that 35 feet. You
Right.
can't
It's a-
park a trailer on it, you can't put a storage unit on it, you can't, that's just gotta be
It's a-
green space or grass or crushed rock or,
One of the things we try to do in this, and you know, you see it in the cities and stuff like that too, we try to transition gracefully. So we don't put an industrial area in the middle of R1.
right.
We try to have industrial and then commercial and then maybe R4 and then some R3s and then R2 or R1, so that you're not having people butting heads and stuff any more than, you know, and that's the, in a perfect world, if we could start all over again and build it from the beginning, you know, you'd have that. But you see that on, there's an area north of the Twin Cities on 35E where they have the interstate, and then up against the interstate they have R4, and then behind it they have some R3, not R3, but they have some R2, and then a quarter of a mile from the interstate you're looking at R1 housing and golf courses and stuff like that. So, you know, there is kind of some logic to the stuff we're doing, but we want to be able, if they can take the buffer zone and they can stack, you know, containers on it or build stuff on it, then that takes away the whole purpose of it, and that is to de-intensify the structure that's going in there and the businesses going in there from the residentials. So, you know, people don't want to have, you know, have a gas station dropped in the middle of their neighborhood. and have to live with the noise and the lights and everything else. So we have our ordinance here. We have nobody in the audience to comment. Does the planning commission have any further discussion or questions or anything about it?
Was there public comment through phone or letter?
We published hearing notice in the paper and there have been no comments. This case, this case, because it's not site-specific, there's no notification to neighbors, because this is citywide, so.
This is, yeah.
Okay.
And this is more of a for the future, because this won't apply to anything happening right at this moment.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, we need a motion then to approve it?
Yeah, if you guys want to send it to city council,
Yeah. That's the feeling? Approve it, send it to city council?
I think so. I'd
Okay.
make a motion to send this to the city council.
Okay, we have a motion, do we have a second?
I'll second it. Ron, please.
Okay. Any further final discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries?
I think it's going to be better than what we have.
Good.
That's the way I look at it.
Well, that's
too,
what we're
Ray.
trying to do. We're trying to make it better than what we have.
Improve it.
Yeah. It'll help the planning commission too, deal with it.
Well, it seems like in some situations, it actually allows you to use a little bit more sense for certain
Oh, yeah.
situations, like what you mentioned, if you have a lot that doesn't really even allow for a 35-foot buffer, but yet there's an alley there or something, and you just see that you really don't need it, you can still say, go ahead and, so I mean, in that case, I think it's a good thing.
Well, yeah,
What
exactly.
What did Angie, what did they decide? They've got a street, that new car wash is going up. It's kind of scary for us because that's where the trouble with the American Inn came in, was, hey, there's no fence there. There needs to be a fence. And they were kind of wondering what they needed to do, but they have a street buffering that whole side of their business.
Yeah, I think, I kind of feel with that one, that if this is approved for a conditional use permit, I think in that one, because, so that was a case where we had a discussion about that buffer strip. Historically, we have not required, the street has been, it's a non-issue if there's a street there, like we talked about at Arby's, right? So that was the case on that one. But they wanted to do something for protection of the neighborhood as well, because some of the homes that are along that one that could be in line with some headlights are also the ones that had an issue with the American. So Angie was sensitive to that. So I think the planning commission discussion on that one was to basically table it because we had pending conversations going on and pending ordinance amendments. So I think that would probably be if this is approved by the council, I think that would be a good one to start with for a conditional use permit. And I think she was in favor of that, where they could say, they could bring a plan to you and say, you know, this is what we would like to do. And I think we, you know, that one, we left the latitude up to the planning commission on the, you know, the 35 feet, the fence and that type of thing. So she might come, her and her partners may come with a plan that says, here's where the headlights are gonna shine, we think we should put a fence here. So I think this one would, I think hers would be a good one to be a start with for a conditional use permit, because I think we kind of kept that one open because there was pending conversations.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. And
I
did we
think
vote
you
on
already,
it? I don't think so.
Yeah, you
We're
did.
done.
We did?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So that's easy then. Good. Next item is the items for consideration. These are just some ideas that we have of things that we should be looking at from time to time. When we have time within meetings and stuff like that, it's kind of a waste of time to come here for a 5 or 10 minute meeting and then go home. So we can pick some of these out over the next year or two and talk to them. And we're looking for both ideas and hot buttons. What do you want to talk about next at the next meeting or two?
These particular ones are ones that have came up that feel like they should have some more clarity added to them. These are just a list of ones that have came up, and there's some uncertainty at times on some of these, and could add some clarification. And I think the one that Dick brought up, the easement piece, that's one of them on our list, and that's probably kind of an important one. And the idea would be if there's, one, we could tackle one of these with every couple planning commission meetings, like say you wanted to talk about easements, then normally what we would do, the commission would instruct staff to get some information together on, what are other communities doing our size, what's comparable things, and then we would draft some draft language for you to look at, work with Delray on that, and then at the next planning commission meeting, we might come, if you said on this one, let's talk about easements next month, then we'd go ahead and get some information together for you to look at. What are other towns doing? What are the issues we're having? Do a draft ordinance with Delray, and then we'd bring that back to the planning commission. You'd look at it, adjust how you felt, and then your action at that meeting could be call for a public hearing to discuss, to do this amendment, and then we would do the process we just did with the buffer one. And because you guys are new, I know I mentioned it at another planning commission meeting, but we do a lot of getting scenarios from other communities, what are other communities doing. We do a lot of research on that, and Ashley Halick in our office does a lot of that work, and she does a really, really good, thorough job of that. So that's one of the things that we'll do as well when you want to look at these.
Well, I was brainstorming with my son and a couple of other people the other day, and a couple of things that we came up with was to marijuana sales. It sounds like the governor's pretty much going to try to push through some type of marijuana, sales, making it legal in Minnesota.
For recreation?
Do we want to have it? Do we want to treat it like liquor and have it be a certain distance away from churches, a certain distance away from schools? Or are we going to allow them to put a dispensary across the street from buy the old hockey arena and turn it into a opium den?
Yes, because there is no regulation right now. So they do allow the CBD sales.
Yeah.
Now, and the only real regulation is in regard to pharmaceutical or, packaging type of stuff. There's nothing in regard to zoning or where the sales are, or licensing or anything to that effect.
So in Thief River, basically, we'd look at it as a retail, so it could go anywhere retail could go.
Yep.
What I learned long ago was in engineering, you have MnDOT and you have the feds. We'd let somebody with all the money and to start, and then trickle down effects. So here you read about what's going on with marijuana sales and all the problems. So, if we can let some of that filter through and take the best of the best and end up down the line, and then we don't have to solve all these problems at the end.
I suspect that there's going to be maybe some legislation coming out to address it, because there's been quite a few complaints on it.
Yeah.
So there's some cities that have imposed a moratorium on the sales for a period of time to allow, review and discussion, and I think you can do that up to a year.
Hasn't Crookston done that? Are they sort of taking a hard line on this, have they?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Red Lake Falls passed an ordinance in regard to it with licensing and fees, so that they at least know who's doing it, where's it at,
Yeah.
That type of thing.
Kind of starting on.
Isn't there conflict with this since it's still against the law on the federal level?
I don't know about the CDB oil.
Well, I
to a
meant
certain
the
extent.
recreational side of it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, legalization of marijuana would be, a little bit different, but
Yeah.
Okay.
Because you got in the CBD, I mean, they have the CBD oils that are strictly for different uses that aren't mind altering, and then you have the Delta 8 side of it that kind of accidentally got passed somehow, I guess, that does have, I guess, slang term would be like 3-2 weed, you know, where it's, you know, it has some similar effects, probably not as strong. So would we be talking about treating those two differently, where somebody could sell CBD that doesn't have any psychoactive effect in comparison to Delta 8 that would?
And from a zoning standpoint, I don't know if we would necessarily differentiate between that, but we could set parameters as to where it's allowed. And then if you want to restrict it, you know, in regard to schools or churches or something to that effect, I think that would be a valid zoning,
Issue, yeah.
taking a look at it.
I mean, right now, most gas stations sell it, you know, so I don't know how that would compare in vicinity to churches or schools, but
I know in Colorado, the marijuana's legal in Colorado, but it's not legal at the airport because that's federal property. So they have a forgiveness bin or something like that, and I guess the janitors have a thriving business.
payday every day.
But I bring that up, you know, we had quite a lot of discussion on guns and shooting ranges. And concerns about having them be, you know, too close to schools and things like that. And I was just thinking, in the terms of marijuana sales, do we want to restrict it so that they have to be 500 feet away from a, you know, from a school and a church, like liquor stores and stuff like that?
Yeah.
We
think
restrict
that makes
that
sense.
in the zoning stuff. But that's an example of something we could put on the list if you guys think that's good, and we can deal with it as either the time allows or as the situation allows. Another one that I came up with was animals in the city limits besides chickens. I mean, we didn't allow chickens and now we allow chickens. Why don't we allow horses? Why don't we allow cows? Why don't we allow goats? Or, you know, a lot of rabbits? And stuff like that. I mean, I'm just pet deer. You know,
We've all got them right now.
yeah, we don't have those right
Yeah,
now.
exactly right.
Well, you notice on the bottom line, it says deer hunting in the city limits.
Well, I saw that, you know, and I thought, they do that in Red Lake Falls. You can, I think it's archery and crossbows.
Yep.
But, that's something else. I've got a dozen deer go through my yard every night over to the neighbor who feeds them. And then, as we found out, they don't do too well on that very high carbohydrate corn and things like that, and then they bloat and die, usually under my pine tree. So then my neighbor gets to feed the deer and watch them, and I get to haul the dead ones away. I feel like an undertaker, I'll tell you. I had one last year or two this year so far.
Oh,
And then one other thing that we should just have on our radar screen is electric car charging. Because as we get more electric cars, there's going to be some entrepreneurs out there who are going to try to figure out a way to make a buck on it. And they'll want to put an electric car charger, on the front of my building. And they'll pay me to be there, and they'll pay for the electricity, and then there'll be a cord that lays across the sidewalk over to the car, or something like that. I mean, I'm just kind of, free thinking on this, but
Yeah.
they may want to use a city park, or city parking lots, and approach the city to rent 5 spaces. And it's awfully hard to say no, but some of the things we have to consider is every once in a while when they're charging these cars, they start on fire. So Teslas, Tesla, they always say you always should carry marshmallows in your Tesla.
Where's that EV charging station at that was supposed to go into the gazebo park over there?
It was, yeah, Floyd Bielsa
I don't know where
Park.
that's at.
It never got built.
No.
It's supposed to be built. I remember Dale Norlock told me that he wanted us to get internet access to them there because they were gonna be putting it in, and they need a internet access because it works on a credit card.
Yeah, I know they needed a transformer thing or whatever, and then there's certain credits that Northern Municipal Power Agency has that are available, and there might even be some more state ones coming down.
Yeah,
But that's where they were kind of contemplating, is putting it in the park over there. So they'd have, you know, again, 4 parking spots or
I
something
think
to
this
that
one was
effect.
2. I believe this one was 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
yeah. But I
And
just.
the idea was that it would be close to downtown for retail, so if people were stopping, you know, there's a place for them to go. You know, as to be, you know, out in the country where you just sit out there and it doesn't really benefit the city.
Your scenario, Dick, too, you could have like a single family home where somebody could want to put that in as a business, and then how do you treat that? Do you treat it as a business?
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
I mean, I could see that on the,
On the
you know,
horizon.
in the front yard of somebody's house, the people park on the street and plug in, you know, or something, and they've got a credit card, they swipe the credit card. And more of these cars are getting to be plugged in. What percentage would you say? Of course, this is really you know, we'll be the last ones to have it really, have a lot of it here because of the distance we are from anything. You know, I mean, it's, with a Tesla right now, it's a 3-day trip to Rochester.
Yeah, through the NMPA stuff and the state of Minnesota, they've got a corridor grant. And I think it's including Bagley and Thief River, and I think, is it War Road, I think? I don't think it's necessarily Roseau. But they're hitting, you know, every so 100 miles, many 100 miles, and then putting in some charging stations or giving grants for them.
But there's one, you know, there's one down in Motley that, you know, that I always see when I go by, and there's never anybody there. But as the cars become more prevalent, there will be people there. And when Mark and Del Rey and I are all going to the cities, and we'll hit Motley and have to charge up, and Mark and I are already there, we'll just have to tell Del Rey he's got to wait for, you know, 4 hours before he can plug in, unless he goes to somebody's house or some other charging site. And I'm just seeing this as something, as we, you know, it might be something 5 years down the road, but we should just kind of be set, because we may not want to have, you know, I don't know, you know, charging stations in an R1, for example.
Right, unless it's their own personal charging station inside of the garage. But as
Yeah,
far as
inside
for-
or, you know, around the house, that's not a problem, but I'm thinking,
As far as for,
you know, I'm thinking like,
yeah,
put one out by the street out, you know, and,
Well, that's what I was just thinking about, you know, if somebody got inventive and said, hey, let's, I'm
And the-
gonna put charging stations in front of my house on the public street, because anyone can park on a public street.
right.
But of course, the neighbors don't want you to do that, because that takes up all the parking spots. Well, now this guy's making money off of that, and what do you do?
Yeah,
Let's just say somebody moves in Cartway Drive and on the north side decides, hey, I've got 4 spots here, I can,
or, you know, Matt and I get this great idea, and we go around and we say to you, we'll give you $100 a month to set the thing on your property with a 15-foot cord, so the guy can park out front there. Then the people across the street don't have access to that parking space, stuff like that. I mean,
So you probably want to just basically require off-street parking, and that would solve most of the problem.
And only in certain districts, so it's not in a residential.
That's what
My
Ferguson,
daughter has a Tesla, so she goes home, she plugs it in at home. She goes into the city, and it's usually by a retail, so if she wants to run into Target while she's charging her car, she can. And that makes sense, because it's not disturbing anybody.
right.
So it's just that if you'd want to take up a space of a park, which we've gone through trouble before with people taking up green space. So if you do that, are you back to that same situation of taking away green space from people?
I think it was gonna go in a city parking lot, the city would have to be a part of it, so I think there you're pretty safe. And and otherwise it would, I think it would be allowable in any commercial zoning district. You know, a lot of them you see them at gas stations and, you know, that makes sense. Retail places, people go charge in, then they go shopping and,
So kind of
Hotels.
like where the Catholic church is in that parking lot area there, there'd be a couple stands, okay.
but the city would own those because they wouldn't allow anybody to do that on city
No.
property except for themselves or some type of arrangement. with the
But I
council.
have a parking lot, you know, next
Yeah,
door,
yours is
north of our
different.
building.
Yeah.
And I could put 5 charging stations in and, you know, electric vehicle charging only type thing. Mount the things against our building and they, you know, they back in and plug into them and stuff. And one of my kind of envious, jealous little pet peeves is when I'm in a parking ramp down in the cities and there are 4 or 5 or 6 open parking spaces because they're for Tesla parking only and, you know, to recharge, and there's nobody in them. And I'm driving around looking for a parking space in this ramp, and I can't find a parking space except where the god darn Tesla is.
Take the handicap, they're empty too.
Fergus Falls has theirs, a real nice, their brand new library, and they've got their charging station right in the parking lot of the library.
Yep.
So it's accessible to the public, and I think they have a second one, or there's one being proposed, but could have one right out here behind the train. Perfect.
I think
That's
as
been
the need
talked about,
arises,
too.
you're going to see gas stations putting them in, you're gonna see Walmart, you're gonna see,
Yeah.
you know, different strip malls may have 1 or 2 spots, it's just slowly going to happen, you know?
Yeah.
But we should just try to be on the front edge of this.
Front end, so that basically. if
So we
you're-
don't have somebody
Like
sitting.
downtown retail business can't just have one sticking out their wall, like what you mentioned earlier, cord coming across the sidewalk.
Well, the
stuff
other
like
thing
that.
too, I was thinking is, particularly with downtown businesses, but with any business, you know, we require them to have X number of parking spaces for their business. And a lot of them, like, an example, Ace Hardware, they could put 4 chargers in and they got 5 parking spaces. And people come into town to work and they pull up into the Ace parking space and they park all day there. And customers can't get access to it. You know, so now the customers have to go park somewhere else because these cars are sitting there. And Ace would have to figure out whether it was worth it to them to not have customer parking or not. But I know that there's an awful lot of business owners over the years have always parked right in front of their own business all day long. So, anyway, those are the ones that I came up with, and I guess as you,
You can keep, I just wrote it down
okay,
here, so I got it.
as you think of these things, please, you know, forward them on to Mark or Del Rey or myself, and we'll add them to the list. But what, on this list, what would be the next hot button that you'd wanna look at, if anything?
I was looking at the list and things that we can maybe solve before the Teslas and the rest of them. And something that could be done sooner rather than later. Hopefully get new businesses to come to town, et cetera, et cetera. So I looked, 3 that popped out at me was the sign setbacks on frontage roads. That's a safety issue too, so that might be something that would be easy to do and just a matter of having some regulations. Another one, of course, the drive-through service, car stacking problems we had there with McDonald's. And then the other one that stood out, the fences, trees, gardens, and shrubs on easements. You know, that's continuous, and I think if we had some more information for everybody, I think we could solve a lot of problems there. And then, of course, the last one is lot splits. You know, when there used to be a lot of vacant lots around town, somebody on each side bought half of it, so on and so forth. There aren't as many vacant lots now anymore, but it'd be nice to have some regulations there because that affects future assessments. So if I buy the half a lot next door and then later on the city comes through and all of a sudden, gee, my assessments went up by 50%. Oh, that's right, I bought this lot over here, so things like that might solve some problems.
We had two lot splits this winter. I think I did 2 lot splits, and I always look for minimum areas, minimum frontage,
Yeah.
you know, access, all those things, but they're just handled administratively right now. And some communities look at those as a planning commission action, so, you know, that's something that could be turned into a permit for a lot split where the planning commission looks at it in a little more depth. That's an option. That's, I think I put that one on there.
And another problem solver there is probably there's a service line, water and sewer service line to that lot, and then they split it. Well, then all of a sudden you got a problem. Well, whose responsibility is? So some other these are the things that need to be done if that's what's in the best interest of the future of
Yeah, another thing I can see too, you know, it's similar to what we were looking at out by McDonald's out in that area where the River of Life Church bought that Red Owl after they'd spent so much money on the infrastructure.
Yeah.
You have a block and you've got a house there, so you've got a user of utilities and a taxable piece of property. Now they split it in half, and half a vacant lot is worth maybe $100 a year in taxes, whereas a $125,000 or $200,000 house on that piece of property is worth a couple $1,000s in taxes. So the city loses living unit. City loses revenue. I mean, the city just loses all the way around. They lose tax revenue, they lose utility revenue, but they still have to maintain the street out front of it. They still have to maintain the alley. The garbage truck still drives by it, but there's no service there for them. And so it's a. I mean, I'm not in favor of 25-foot lots and that kind of densification like we're in Europe or Japan, but still, it's a consideration.
I think that noise, light, and dust was always something that I thought was kind of hard when we had the elevator come up. The people that bought the place there bought it knowing that that was industrial or for that purpose. Yet at the same time, you feel bad for them, but they probably bought it at a really good price because it was zoned that way. And yet their health might be affected. So is there any way, is it just because that was so old and already grandfathered in that way, you
Yeah.
can't change that?
Right, but they've also intensified the use quite a bit, from what it was.
Yeah, and they do have a air quality permit with the state of Minnesota.
So, okay.
I think they've intensified the use there. It's not as what it was, but all of those people moved in next to an elevator. I think that needs to be considered.
And that's
too,
why
right?
we voted that way, but yet at the same time, there's that compassion, you feel bad for somebody, yeah, they got the land at the great price, and it was a lumberyard, but now it is a grain elevator,
Mhm.
so his wife is sick, or the neighbor's sick, and it's just not really a comfortable situation, so if you could stop something like that from happening in the future, wouldn't it be nice, instead of having the place full of people that are feeling bad and angry?
Oh, absolutely. Great.
Didn't pollution control come up and check it, or supposedly?
We are going to have by we, I mean the city council's, public safety is going to have a discussion next month with the manager. We've got a couple of issues to bring up, and it doesn't have a lot to do with the dust situation right now, but it does have to do with the pigeons.
Mhm.
And see if we can't get somewhere with them, and I think we're going to bring up some of the other issues too, and see if we can work a couple more things out. So we'll see how that goes.
And we do have lighting and dust in our ordinance. It just, so is it good enough? Is something that should be revisited or looked at a little bit more? So I know Leanne and Mike both have appointments here. They have to leave.
Oh,
pretty soon,
okay.
so.
So let's go on then.
Is there any one of these that you want to start looking at for some information for the next planning commission meeting? I mean, you mentioned the easement one, that was kind of a hot one. Is that something, with
Yeah,
spring coming, that
let's
feels to
start
me
with
that'd be
that.
an important one?
Yeah,
think so.
let's start with that. That's a pretty straightforward one.
So do you want to, so just direct staff to get some information together for the next
Everybody
For the
happy
first
with that?
meeting.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, item number 5, social media policy. You got this at our last meeting, and they're asking you to sign it and not be jackrabbits on the city's website.
Now, I suppose,
Pass these in.
yeah, and then Matt and Terry will get you copies of the, or do you have them already?
I got it.
You got, okay.
Any questions on the social media policy? Okay, we did election of officers, so do you have any other?
I just made a note on other to add the approved agenda at the beginning,
Oh, okay,
yeah.
That's good.
Okay. So, anybody in the group, Mike?
I had, at the end of the last meeting, I asked about officers and directors insurance.
Oh,
And, very quickly, our discussion on buffer zones took a quick legal turn. And I'm just wondering if, as members of the commission, we're covered under an O&D policy by the city.
We
Or
could
the
check
city?
with the League of Minnesota Cities and see
Well, I
if
would
there's
like that. I mean, we're
directors.
referred to in the policy as agents
Mhm.
and representatives, sounding more like,
mm-hmm,
you know,
yeah.
just
Yeah,
to,
good question.
I just like to have someone check on it.
I mean,
Sure.
that's a opportune way to harass, boards and policies and stuff like that, is to just name them in a lawsuit against the city for something that you're disagreeing with, just get the, and if they win, then we're in trouble, but, so. Okay, we'll find that information out, we'll have it.
Thank you.
We'll have it for next week, or next month. And if there's no other business before the group, entertain a motion to adjourn. Matt?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Terry?
Second.
Hey, all right.
We gotta get them in here, we gotta get them on the record. Okay, no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Passes anonymously.
Question, like the city council, what do they do?
Very good.